This is the second of our public workshops, and we're happy to have you tonight. Tonight, we're going to walk through kind of the results of the previous workshop, but we're also going to give you some new information, and we're going to actually have a couple of chances for you to ask questions or make comments as we go through the presentation. And at the very end, we will also have the ability to take questions and answers at that, give you answers at that time. So I am going to turn the presentation over to Nancy Bergeron of JMT. This is our primary consultant for this project, and take it away, Nancy.
Thank you, Dave. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us this evening. This project, the Union Street Reconfiguration and Streetscape Project, is very much a community-driven project. We want to hear from you, the community, as well as our other stakeholders. You can see on the screen the input that we're seeking as we go along on the process. Public is a large percentage of this, along with an advisory committee, which is made up of our stakeholders, and you can see some of the key folks in orange, as well as our management committee, which is the government agencies that are involved in this project. Tonight's discussion is going to focus on the visioning results, which is the results of our first workshop. We're also going to discuss how we took those visioning goals that you all provided us at the last workshop and turned them into alternative solutions. And as we go through this, we want to hear from you on our alternatives. So to start, we're going to go over the previous public visioning workshop. So we had a workshop as well as some online engagement activities. And we started these activities. We had a great response, by the way. So everyone that participated in that, we really appreciate it and would like you to continue to do that. We're going to have some additional online activities after this workshop as well, that hopefully you can participate in. We had 61 responses for a lot of these questions. Our first questions were asking about how you use Union Street. You can see the results there. How you get to Union Street, which is the pie chart on the right. Look like about a quarter of the folks walk and a little over half of the folks that responded drive to Union Street. What was interesting about that response is the lower right-hand corner is, in the future, how would you like to travel to and along Union Street? And you can see the walk and bike responses grew significantly. So that is a measure to us that that's a need and that's a desire in the visioning. And where do you go most often? You can see the overwhelming response was restaurants, and folks included some of their favorite restaurants there. So we also asked what you think about Union Street. We got a lot of comments about parking, about signage, about safety, about providing bike lanes, and traffic calming, the speed along Union Street. So all things that we can use in our alternatives. So we also asked some specific statements about your experiences on Union Street, driving, walking, biking, riding the bus, and parking. And we really appreciated those folks that took the time to write out some information for us and some comments that we could craft and use in our alternatives. Next slide. And then here's some additional ones. So as part of the visioning, we also wanted to know, what do you think Union Street should look like in the future? What should we focus on in these alternatives? And got a lot of great information, again, supporting businesses, supporting economic growth throughout the corridor, improving parking, improving the appearance of the street, making it easier and safer to walk throughout the corridor. And then to wrap up the visioning, we got a lot of statements that we thought really focused on the visioning. And we developed a wish list for change based on the information that we'd received. And we really focused on those as we were putting our alternatives together. Top thing was really prioritizing pedestrians, shade trees, crosswalks, wider sidewalks, providing a safe environment of lighting, slower traffic, retaining the outdoor dining, continuing with aesthetics, and bike lanes, providing some bike lanes on the corridor. So we took all of that visioning information and we developed what we call a purpose and needs statement. I'm going to turn it over to Angie to continue the presentation.
Thanks, Nancy. So the draft purpose and needs statement, it's written here on the screen. I'm not going to read it all out loud. And this is actually the shortened version of the draft purpose and needs statement. The full draft purpose and needs statement is posted and available on the project website for full review. But what I want to emphasize here is that the purpose and needs statement developed for this project was directly derived from the visioning and from what we heard from the public and from our stakeholder group in all of our visioning exercises and activities and our listening sessions that we had. So everything that Nancy just brought up was kind of the summary of what we heard, and we basically took everything that we heard and condensed it into this draft purpose and needs statement. So we are looking for feedback on the draft purpose and needs statement. There's a link on the website that you can go review the draft purpose and needs statement, tell us what you think about it, and read the entire document as well if you are interested in doing so. So I will just hit the key highlights quickly, and then I'm going to jump on to the next slide. So the purpose of the street is first and foremost the multimodal mobility and connectivity needs of the local business community. And then the need is really the transportation streetscape improvements along Union Street, with that being between Pennsylvania Avenue and Sycamore, looking to get this street to better function as a Main Street corridor and balance moving cars while functioning as a place for people to shop, dine, recreate, socialize, and improving multimodal connectivity. So what we did is we also wanted to create some draft measures of effectiveness, which it's a mouthful, but what a draft measure of effectiveness is a way that we can meaningfully compare the different alternatives that we've developed to see how well they meet the draft purpose and need, and how well they could demonstrate a successful alternative for this project. So the draft measures of effectiveness are based on the purpose and need. You can see again, the two highest levels of the purpose and need here is better functioning as a main street and the multimodal mobility. So better functioning as a main street, what that means is what we've tried to kind of quantify in some way is how much these different alternatives that we are about to present on the next slides are able to provide green space and shade tree opportunity along Main Street, how well they are able to offer any kind of public gathering space or business frontage space where the businesses along the corridor could put out restaurant tables, outdoor shopping areas, any kind of amenities that will help to bolster that economic development for businesses directly along the corridor. Also looking at the streetscape lighting, something we heard through the visioning was that Union Street could use some better lighting to make the street feel more comfortable for people at nighttime that are enjoying the street for whatever reason they might be there for, whether it be dining, shopping, commuting home, visiting neighbors, that there is some lighting that could be improved there. From the multimodal mobility perspective, we've broken this down into the different modes. So from a pedestrian perspective, looking at how well we can improve ADA access along the corridor and how much additional sidewalk space can be provided. Transit, we don't have an in-depth transit analysis, but we wanted to figure out quantifiably how we could look at it to some level of degree here. And what we came up with was trying to figure out how much delay could be induced on transit if there was a bike lane on the same side of the street as the transit bus stops are located. Also, we wanted these concepts to be able to allow some additional space for transit amenities. Freight is also very important to this corridor. Looking for how well these concepts allow access for freight, for deliveries, pickups, and all of the curbside needs for freight in the corridor. Vehicular level of service, this really is how efficient the corridor is able to move vehicles through, reducing congestion, and then on-street parking capacity as well. And then bicycle level of comfort. The current bike lane that's out there has a pretty low level of comfort. So we wanted to see how well the different alternatives could improve bike level of comfort for people using the roadway. And then also bicycle access and connectivity, how well the concepts can link into the overall bicycle network, improving access and connectivity holistically. I'm going to pause here. So I do have a poll. I think we can go ahead and try it out. It's a quick poll that we wanted to ask, do you agree with the measures of effectiveness? And it is a simple yes, no, or sort of answer. And if anyone wants to discuss why they said yes, no, or sort of, we can open it up. So I'm going to go ahead and launch the poll. So that should pop up on everyone's screen. And I'll give about 45 seconds here to get answers in. So I don't know if you all can see the results yet, or if I'm just seeing them on my end, but the activity has slowed. So I'm going to end the poll. And I'm going to share the results. So you should see the results now on your screen of the poll. The majority of people said yes at 71%. We had someone say no, that was one person, that brings it to 7%. And then we had a few people, 3 people said sort of at 21%. So if anyone wants to discuss or bring up any thoughts they have of why they might have said yes, no, or sort of, I will give about 3 minutes for discussion here before moving on. So if anyone wants to, you can raise your hand, you can type in the chat, you can go ahead and unmute yourself, just to indicate that you want to speak at this time. I do not see any hands being raised. There's nothing in the chat. I haven't heard anyone else's voice besides my own. So I'm assuming there's no big discussion here, which is fine. We have plenty of more opportunity for discussion as we keep moving. So to get into the meat of the presentation now, I want to spend some time talking about the alternatives considered and our draft measure of effectiveness scoring. So we're going to first start with talking about the alternatives. So we're presenting these alternatives in order of the highest scoring alternatives to the lowest scoring alternatives using those draft measures of effectiveness that I just presented. So alternative A here is the highest scoring alternative, but I want to really describe what's going on here. And then I do want to go to the next alternative, and then we're going to pause again for more conversation. So alternative A, as you can see, this alternative would change the streetscape by moving the curb line inward. So we're shrinking the overall footprint of the road to accommodate all of the things that are happening on the outsides of the road on the sidewalk level. A big thing about this alternative that I want everyone to be aware of, this alternative would have caused the undergrounding of utilities through the corridor. And that undergrounding of utilities does give more space and flexibility in the streetscape for different uses, but it also is a very expensive and very lengthy construction time to do that work. It's a much different project than if you're able to keep your utilities above ground. So this option does increase pedestrian space, and it does give it extra room for outdoor dining and retail. It also has a southbound bike lane. It is a more comfortable bike lane than what is out there today. But the big, expense is the undergrounding of the utilities and the lengthy construction time of this alternative. The next alternative is very similar in that it also shrinks the roadway footprint. It also moves the curb line inward. But what this one does is it works around the existing utilities. This is able to reduce the construction costs and reduce the amount of time it would take to construct this roadway. So in this alternative, we did bump the bike lane to the opposite side of the road, as you can see from the other alternative I just showed. And we did this to give more space equally, or as equal as we could, for pedestrian uses and business uses on either side of the roadway. So this slide here just shows those two alternatives. Alternative A was the first one I showed you, and then alternative B is the second one. And we wanted to pause here again for any kind of questions, comments, thoughts, anything that we want to discuss between these two alternatives. And I'm also going to ask Dave Gula to go ahead and help fill in any other pieces that I might have missed on these alternatives.
Thanks, Angie. I don't think you missed anything. The one thing that I would add is the order of magnitude when we say more expensive to underground the utilities. And due to projects that we've worked on in Wilmington and a current project that we are dealing with right now along Shipley Street, what we found out is that undergrounding a block of utilities adds about $1 million to the project. Now, that's a lot of money, but then when you realize that we have utility lines on both sides of Union Street, that would add approximately $2 million to each block of the project. And considering that we're in excess of 12 blocks, that adds an extraordinary high cost to the project. And one of the things that we also have to make sure that the public is aware of is that the bulk of for this project will be federal and state funds, and those will be transportation funds. And transportation funds cannot be used to underground utilities. That is how DelDOT, the state of Delaware, functions and manages their budgets. So that's just something we want to make sure folks are aware of. We did not hear any calls from the community previously to underground the utilities, and everybody loves the way it looks, and it would be great. But I just want to make sure that we allow that people understand that it is not just a small amount of extra cost, it's a very large amount of extra cost. And then I'll shut up now, and we'll see. There we have some hands raised and some questions.
Yep, so I'm going to go ahead and Jared Kaufman, I'm going to go ahead and ask to unmute you. So you should be able to unmute and ask your question.
Hello, good evening. Sorry if I missed this. So for alternative A, is the bike lane, is that going to be on the Ellesmere bound side or the Pennsylvania Avenue bound side? Which side of the street is on? I apologize.
So the
I'm sorry. It's not going to be on the west or east side. I apologize.
So it's on the east side in alternative A. So imagine you're on Union Street looking north is what these concepts are.
Okay. Sorry for the confusion.
No worries. And then we have a question in the chat from Will. How much funding is there currently for this project?
That's probably a question that I should answer. At the moment, this project is not a funded project in DelDOT's budget. The way that will work is at the end of this project, assuming that we go through the full process, it goes to WMAPCO's council, and the council approves a preferred concept. That's when the project then can go into the regional transportation plan. Once it's in the regional transportation plan, then it's eligible for funding through DelDOT's capital transportation plan. Now, the thing to remember is that that's a 4 to 6 year plan. That's how often, and DelDOT basically revises that plan once a year. So we do not anticipate that this project will be funded for probably a minimum of 5 years, and it could be longer than that. But I would state that we've had success with projects that do get into the regional transportation plan, seeing funding between 4 and 6 years from that point on. So that's sort of how we would look at this now. I know that folks get dismayed when they hear that there won't be any construction for a while. One of the things that we'd like to do as we go through this process is find things that can be done sooner as part of this project that would be less expensive, and see if there are things that we can do and recommend to be done more quickly. But just the nature of transportation funding in the state of Delaware is you do have to wait a while to get a large project completed. I don't see any other questions. There is a question from Adele Meehan. Adele, imagine you're standing in Union Street looking at cars and bikes coming at you, and that's the perspective you have when you look at these street types. So if the cars are coming at you, restaurants and things like Mrs. Rubino's and El Toro are on your right-hand side, and restaurants such as Rocco's Grill are on your left-hand side. And cars are coming at you, so get out of the street. All right, I think you can continue, Angie.
All right. So alternative C here, this option is similar to the other options in that we've reduced the roadway footprint. We have a northbound bike lane in this option with a southbound shared bicycle lane. So we were trying to see how we could get two-way bicycle access, was one of the goals of this alternative. This one also undergrounds the utilities, so all that discussion applies here. But it also doesn't give as much space for pedestrian room and outdoor retail and dining as some of the other options. So that was part of the reason it didn't score as high as the others. And I'll pause here if there's any comments, questions, thoughts on alternative C before moving to the next alternative. All right, I'm going to go ahead and move along, and we can always come back to these. We're going to have plenty of time for question and answer at the end. So we're going to be here. We'll be able to switch back through if we need to. So alternative D now on the screen. This alternative was aimed at preserving the back-end angled parking, but moving it to the other side of the street than where it currently is. That this was a suggestion that came out of the public involvement that we did previously, where someone brought up that it might be easier to pull out of the back-end angle parking if it were positioned on the other side of the roadway. What this does, though, is it really makes it hard to still have bike and pedestrian access and space for outdoor dining. So what we've demonstrated in this alternative is that you are able to get that back-end angle parking in, but it's sacrificing space for a bicycle facility. We show here a shared bike lane, which this would actually be a lower level of bicycle comfort than the current configuration of Union Street. So any thoughts or comments or questions here? All right. Alternative E now, again, shrunken in roadway footprint, but we have put two bicycle lanes on either side of the street, trying to prioritize that two-way bike access on Union Street. And what this does is it is expensive again and lengthy construction time because of the undergrounding utilities, but it does reduce the amount of available pedestrian space that could be used for all kinds of purposes, including walking and businesses and just the general enjoyment of the street by people on feet. There is some space, but it's not as much space as some of the other alternatives have offered. Pausing for questions again. So a question just came in the chat. Why the big focus on bikes? So we have a number of alternatives that we've tried to make different focuses of. And that's why some of the alternatives deprioritize the bikes, some prioritize the bikes. Bicycle access was brought up in the public visioning as something that needs to be part of this study. It came through into our purpose and need statement. And that's why we are trying to get some kind of bicycle access, at least to provide, replace what's out there today, as there is an existing bike lane, with the goal of making it more comfortable than what's out there today.
I'll jump in here too, Angie. One of the things that we look to as we put these plans together is we look at the city's comprehensive plan and we look at the city's bicycle plan. And this street is shown in the city's bicycle plan, which was just approved within the last 2 years. So it's a recent document that this is a desired street for bicycle access, partly because it is an extra wide street. So the goal is to have some bicycle accommodation and certainly an improvement, as Angie said, over what is out there now, which is confusing, difficult to use, and actually a lot of people don't feel very comfortable using it. So one of our goals is to have at least the southbound bike lane that we have now, but make it buffered and more comfortable for use. Some people will complain they never see cyclists out there. That may be so. You're probably not out there 24 hours a day, but the other reason that you don't see as many cyclists out there is because it isn't a very comfortable lane right now. It's not separated from traffic, and it doesn't feel very safe, especially if you were trying to ride with your children. So one goal that's come through, even if, not just from the public, but from the city administration, is that we're doing our best to accommodate bicycles, at least in the current southbound direction, as part of our plan.
There's another question in the chat, Dave, if you want to answer. It's, will the parking options be the same throughout the corridor or a mix of back in and parallel?
To answer that one, the one option that you saw that showed back in angled parking, that's the only option that showed back in angled parking. In all the other options, we're looking at just parallel parking, as was out there before we made that transition from 3 lanes down to 2. And that is, again, because it takes up so much additional space to have the back in angled parking.
So the goal would not be to have a mixed match of back and angle parallel every other block, or anything. It would be a consistent corridor wide application. The back and angle parking option that we showed, there is back and angle on one side with parallel parking on the other side of the roadway, but that would be, again, a consistent feature if that were the alternative that were preferred.
As far as that question of numbers, we do know that when we added the back-in angled parking to the left side, it accommodated approximately 9 additional spaces that we didn't have previously. So we would lose those, that we would go back to the number before, 9 spaces. Now, the city has transitioned to, instead of traditional 1 meter per every space, they're using that kind of kiosk. And so in some places, there aren't the same kind of markings on the pavement. So it does sometimes accommodate additional parking. If you've got a bunch of people with small cars, you end up fitting more cars per block. And that is something that the city has done specifically for that reason. We have not seen that in this section of the city yet, but we will be consulting with the city on parking as we move forward with the preferred alternatives.
Good questions. I'm going to go ahead and move on to the next alternative. So this is alternative F. Again, similar to the alternative you just saw, but the big difference on this is the utilities remain. Working around the utilities, what can we do to get this two-way bike access? And you can see this alternative did not score as high as the others either, due to the reduced amount of sidewalk space for the outdoor dining and pedestrian use. It's too small on the right side of the screen, which would be the east. side of the corridor that there's not much space for businesses to do anything in the sidewalk without impacting the pedestrian access route, which is a need for accessibility standards. So this alternative did not score as well as the previous alternatives. So I will pause again quickly for questions, and then I will show the next slide here, which is the results of all these alternatives. So this table here lists the alternatives that I've just presented in the same order that I just presented them. You can see how we did the scoring here to come up with those scores that you were seeing on each alternative. There was no weighting applied to any of this, the scoring table. We just did a score of 1 to 3 with how well the alternatives seem to meet that particular measure of effectiveness. And you can see the results that a lot of these alternatives, there isn't a giant gap in between them, but we did see that, you know, the top two, A and B, did emerge as the highest scoring, where the other ones just kind of all fell within the same proximity range to one another. So I am going to go ahead and go to the next slide here, which I wanted to just quickly mention that there were additional alternatives that we considered, but these alternatives were looking at not moving the curb line. How could we reconfigure Union Street without moving the curb? And what we found is that these alternatives did not meet the purpose and need, and therefore were dropped from further consideration. Our analysis found that you do need to move the curb line to really address the needs of this road as have been identified through our planning process. So I'm
before we move on, Angie, I just want to note that this presentation will be on the website. We will also have an activity that you can also look at. So really, we're not asking you to have, this is your last chance to comment. This is your first chance to comment. And you'll have, I think we've allowed 2 weeks for folks to take a look and send, you know, that information, send the link to the webpage to your friends, to your neighbors, other people who use Union Street quite a bit. And so we can get, you know, we have more opportunity for comment. We will also post both the English recorded presentation from this evening, and then we'll also have posted the Spanish interpretation to the webpage so that you'll have your opportunities, you know, for to look at everything again, to think about it, to send comments. I'm pretty sure my email address is all over the place, so you can always send comments to me as well. Again, our goal is, you know, we want to make sure that we get through this workshop roughly on time. We want to take as many questions and comments as we can, but we also don't want you to feel you're rushed. And this is your only chance to look at it and think about it. Some of us, you know, sleep on it and wake up with a completely different idea that we didn't think of. So we're going to give you that opportunity. You'll have about 2 weeks to comment.
Great. And I think I'm going to now hand it over to Nancy to tell us about the project timeline and next steps.
Thanks, Angie. Next slide. So where are we in this process? We mentioned that we've had a previous public workshop, a visioning workshop. We've, as you can see on the slide, that happened on May 19th. We've met with our partners, the Wilmington Initiatives Group, which is our governmental agency group. We've developed some initial concepts, which you've seen today, and reviewed those with our public partners. Next slide. We met with the stakeholders, which is our advisory committee, and then October 27th, today, is our second public meeting. So wanting to hear your comments, and you've provided some good input so far, wanting to hear some more of those comments. And after we receive all of those comments, we're going to assess the feasibility of what we're seeing as the preferred concept, and then we're going to develop a final concept and present it back to you at a final public meeting, and then we're going to wrap everything up in a final report. to summarize this project. And then there's Dave's contact information. So any questions, please reach out to Dave. That's a way to get to him. Project website for Union Street is on WMAPCO's website. And we also have online activities that have been mentioned, similar to after the first workshop, that will be available, I believe, today. And I think we want to just open it up to questions at this point.
And I will put a quick plug in to please get on, even at the end of this call, get onto the website, look at those online activities, because we have everything that we've just presented with, there's an easy thumbs up, thumbs down. We'd like to hear what you think of these different alternatives. You can give us a thumbs up if you like it, a thumbs down if you don't. And then there's a comment box that you can explain why you gave it a thumbs up or a thumbs down. So that input is going to be very helpful for us to come up with what is the preferred alternative. So please check out the website. Please get those activities done and share them with everyone you know that might be interested in this project. It will be live for, I think we're running 2 weeks. So you have time to do it, but if you're on here tonight, go ahead and try to jump right on there after this meeting.
And we really are here to take any questions you have or comments at this time. You know, I know this is the first time many of you have seen this information. I'm happy with our team. We worked very hard to bring this together so that you have a chance to look at it and think about it. So
we have a couple comments coming in the chat, so I'm going to just start reading them from the first one that I see. So it's from Daniel Hutton. Were materials for pedestrian spaces identified? Stamped concrete, brick. Also, are there crosswalk improvements? So Dave, you tell me if you want me to take any of these, but I'll just direct them at you otherwise.
To this point, what you've seen so far are very, very rough concepts. I will speak briefly about the standards that we have within the city of Wilmington, where we've over the years tried many, many different kinds of materials for sidewalks and crosswalks. And so some of them haven't gone so well. You may think about some crosswalks that had pavers that were inserted. A lot of you are familiar with brick sidewalks and how well those hold up. The city's kind of switched to a standard wherever possible. We use concrete for sidewalks. We do use brick bands. They're partly for a decorative ornament, but they're also where we have underneath the sidewalk, we may have a ductwork for utilities or power for streetlights and things. So that actually helps us. We can remove the bricks without having to, destroy the whole section of sidewalk. Those are things that we do. In terms of crosswalks, we tend to use what they call the piano keys, those very large polymer blocks that frame out the crosswalk. I'm not saying those are the guaranteed materials, but that's the standard that we generally use within Wilmington. We will be looking at all the crosswalks along this stretch and intersections where there are traffic signals are generally where we show crosswalks. We have to work very closely with DelDOT. There are places where, while it would seem like a great idea to put a crosswalk, if we don't have a signal, sometimes there's a challenge there working with DelDOT, especially on a wider street or a street where the speeds are higher, to put in crosswalks where there is no traffic signal. I'm not saying it can't be done. I'm just saying it's something that we'll have to discuss. With that, I'm going to see if Angie or Nancy have anything to add to what I answered to this question.
No, I don't have anything to add, Dave. I think you hit on all those comments. I think that, we were trying at this point to understand where the sidewalks were a priority versus bike lanes or parking. So just making sure that we have the dimensions correct. And then we can, as part of maybe our final, especially including the cost estimate, would be the materials types. I think we've heard a lot of crosswalk improvement. And we need to provide ADA improvements and make sure all of those crosswalks are ADA compliant, and as well as curb ramps and PAR, which is pedestrian access routes throughout the corridor that will be incorporated into the final concept.
Okay, and just to add, when the first restriping project occurred in 2017, there were, I believe, 4 intersections that we were able to bring to full ADA standards, but I think there are others that we weren't able to do at that time. So as Nancy said, we're going to bring all of them to standards. I do see another question about the estimate, 24 million to bury utilities for the entire corridor. That's an estimate. As I said, when we look at the number of blocks we have to consider for utility lines on both sides, that does add about $2 million per block. Some of those blocks are longer and have more poles, and some of those blocks are shorter. So that is an estimate. That's the best we have at this point. I believe once we have preferred alternative or alternatives, we'll have a better feel for the total cost of the project, and we'll also be able to get a more accurate judgment on those the burying of the utility, what that might cost.
And the next question here, is there a plan to formally get input surveys from Union Street residents and businesses who will be impacted by this project most?
One of the ways we've done that is the advisory committee that we have is actually made up of both resident groups and neighborhood groups, representatives from those neighborhood groups, and also business owners along Union Street. So these workshops and the advisory committee meetings are both opportunities to get that input. I don't think we had the idea that we were going to go door to door with surveys. It becomes a very expensive prospect, but we are working very closely with Westside Grows and counting on them we've been counting on them, and they've come through wonderfully to help us to continue the outreach as we move forward, especially once we have a plan. But I think we'll continue to work with them throughout the course of this project to make sure that our outreach gets to as many people as possible. So that's our public outreach plan is really these workshops, the website information, the flyers that are distributed before the workshops, and really the advisory committee as well. One of the things that WMAPCO has done with some of our more recent projects is to have a committee that we continue to form as we move forward once the study is complete, just to give people updates and to continue to work on refining the plan. That's something we'd like to see happen here as well. So we're not going to just kind of walk away once we have a design. We'd like to continue working with the public, because as we get to construction, then we have an idea of what the disturbance will be and how long that will be. That's more of also very important information for business owners and residents.
And then the last question I see in the chat right now is this project mostly for traffic or businesses?
I'm going to say businesses. One of the things that we've already done on this street was to restrict it or reduce it from 3 lanes down to 2. The goal of that was to try to slow traffic to make it more manageable for pedestrians. Making it a safer and more comfortable place for pedestrians, we've seen in other places, it actually makes it a more profitable place for businesses. People driving down the street at 50 miles an hour don't see signs. They're not stopping. They're just going as fast as they can down a street to get from one end to the other. Places where you slow traffic, there's more opportunity for people to feel comfortable pulling into a parallel parking, because there are a lot of people who don't like parallel parking, especially when traffic's moving too fast. But some of the things that we've heard from the businesses and the residents is to make it more comfortable and more and safer for pedestrians means more people going and walking out there and visiting this street. So the goal is really not so much for the traffic. Cars are welcome everywhere. Our country has made it very comfortable for you to hop in a car and drive anywhere you want to go. But we haven't done such a good job with pedestrian amenities and certainly not bicycle amenities. And so this project is trying to make it fully multimodal. Also for transit users, if you're a transit user, you got to walk at some point out there. And again, we want folks to have the opportunity to use different modes. They don't have to get in their car to come to Union Street because they only feel safe in their car. So I would say that's certainly our goal is probably not, pro traffic, where we're sort of pro multimodal and pedestrian.
Yeah, I think if you define traffic as pedestrian traffic and multimodal traffic, then it would be for all traffic. It's not for the cars. I think it's more for the alternative modes.
And just to go back to previous question about engagement, Sarah Lester wrote in the chat, and she's part of West Side Grows Together. They did hand out flyers to all residents and businesses from Pennsylvania Avenue to Sycamore. They left them in doorways and mailbox. They really hope that folks got them. So, and I see someone just said that they got theirs. So that's great. So the other question I see in here is, does the advisory committee prefer one or more of the alternatives?
We didn't get definitive answers from them. We tried to build some consensus. What we know for sure is when we talked about the alternatives that have been dropped from further consideration, there was no confusion, there was no dissension, there was certainly no one asking to carry those forward. So for us, we're very clear that those three will not continue. As it was, we basically showed the scoring and asked them for comments about the top two scoring alternatives. We explained the two main differences between the two, and we didn't receive any comments trying to propose that one of the 4 or 5 lower scoring alternatives be considered to move forward. So I think from what we got, sort of a consensus conversation was that the top two are considered the best two options. I have been, and I'm going to continue to note the difference in cost and how that's going to have such an impact on how soon we can get funding for this project. And so it's not necessary to tell people, well, we can't do it, but maybe it's like, just because we can move utilities doesn't mean we should. So I would say that we didn't hear anything from the advisory committee to say that those weren't the top two alternatives to consider. And there's still time for people to comment, even tonight. We're hoping that folks will tell us if there's something else that we need to consider, because we will continue to ask. And if we don't hear anything that says differently, I mean, those top scoring alternatives, they did score the best. So there's not a reason not to consider those two as our two best choices. And I want to put another plug in for West Side Grows because they really have been an amazing partner. They have so many contacts within the community. If I have a question for Jackie or Sarah, I get really quick response. Whenever we are going out to the public, they're very, very happy to help us to get the word out. And I just want to basically give them as many props as possible. They just do such good work, and they've been a wonderful partner to work with in the community. And we'll take any other questions that you got. Well, Zoom meeting is like a 4-second rule.
Sarah Lester says she can't talk right now. She's biking on Union Street.
There's a comment that this reminds me of Phoenixville and their Main Street. It doesn't say if that's a positive or a negative. One of the comments that we've gotten from even the city administration was Main Street in Newark is not the same exactly as Union Street. They are different, and they were designed more different to be different. But one of the things that happens on Main Street Newark is having a car is not necessarily an advantage. It is designed for pedestrians, and pedestrians sometimes flow better than cars do on the street. I don't know that we're going to replicate Main Street Newark, but there's also a wonderful proliferation of shopping and restaurant interests down there. Thank you for thank you for saying it's a positive comment. One of the things we heard from the city was we'd love to see the businesses on Union Street be able to thrive. And to thrive, they need people coming out and shopping and eating and buying. So the city's goal really was to make it so comfortable that if you're not in your car, you're just as comfortable as if you are in your car, and you're not unwilling to park your car somewhere and just walk up and down the street and spend the day shopping, or have a couple of meals, or if you're a resident, just be able to walk a block or two and get a meal or ice cream or whatever. And so as we move forward, those are the images that we've been given by city and even by the advisory committee, and those are the images we're gonna strive for as we design these concepts and take these preferred alternatives and bring them into a deeper and more detailed plan, so that we have a better feel for what can this street be. In the absence of actual questions, I'm going to ask Nancy if she has any final words or thoughts to wrap this up with, and we'll kind of walk through that.
Yeah, thank you all for your participation. I'm hoping that the folks that needed some interpretation were able to get it through our interpreters, and appreciate all of the comments. And I'm looking forward to seeing, we just got a comment, a really big, let's grab that real quick. So everyone, I moved to Wilmington from Philadelphia years ago. Everyone told me there were all these great places along Union Street. I totally was one of those drivers who barely looked at the businesses as there were no curb appeal. So I'm totally enthused to have a really cool main street right here near my home in Union Park Gardens. I love all of our favorite restaurants and stores. Great. Fantastic comment. I'm hoping that you're probably biking with Sarah Lester on Union Street right now. Just want to say, thank you all for your participation, and I'm looking forward to the online activities and seeing your comments there so that we can bring back a preferred alternative for you all to review in the next coming months.
Nancy, you have anything further you'd like to say?
I do not. I love the positivity in the chat. That's all I'll say.
Yes. Well, as Adele is utilizing the chat very well, and thank you, Adele. I met Adele just a few years back, working on some projects in and around Union Park Gardens, and I will say that as a personal note, my wife loves a couple of the restaurants along Union Street, and we do drive in because we don't live in Wilmington, but we like to walk around once we get here. And that's something that she did tell me not to mess up the street, that I'll be in trouble if it's not comfortable and more friendly. She hates parallel parking, so I'm not sure I can fix that. She hated the back and angle parking more than she hates parallel parking. But in any case, we have a purple. Some of us, and the city, the city administration, we have a personal stake in how this turns out, how this project turns out, and we appreciate you're taking the time to get onto the website, get onto the workshops, send me messages, enter comments in the chat, and just show up and give us some feedback. Because it's often that you only hear when people are unhappy with the project. It's nice to see in the chat that there are people who are, encouraged and feeling positive about this project. So we thank you for that. There's another person saying they love the back-end parking, but their mother hates it. So that back-end parking is has been a flashpoint for many people for some time. Not seeing any more questions or hands raised. I'm going to thank you all for your time tonight. We really appreciate your taking the time to join us. We look forward to any comments that do come in through the website, and I wish you all a very good evening. And again, we really can't do this project as well as we want to without your participation. So thank you so much for taking the time.